This topic is a landmine. There was a grandmother who got sent to jail for 6 months because AI determined that she did something wrong, but turns out the AI was incorrect. Wow. And we're actually moving into an era of preemptive law enforcement.
Yes.
And that is really scary because when you have unfettered access to someone's life, you can piece together the fragments to form any narrative that you want. We have no oversight or accountability for any abuse of looking through this data.
These things, like, they sound far-fetched, but they're, if not already here, they're very, very close.
VPNs are an atrocious industry filled with scamware. They're funneling every single thing you do through their server. It is simultaneously a terrible scam-filled industry and absolutely necessary protection. Social media companies, for a long time, you would have noticed, oh, now they're requiring a phone number. Oh, you have to give your real name. Oh, now you have to do ID verification. They started bringing this stuff in slowly. This was envisioned as this tool that could break us free from that. And now fast forward, it has become one of the most totalitarian tools for oppression that we have ever seen.
They're changing the writing on the barn. Being as blunt as I can to people who feel like they have nothing to hide in that is, you may not feel that you're being targeted right now, but at some point you will be. There's no question about it. My guest today is Naomi Brockwell. If you're someone who still says, I have nothing to hide when it comes to privacy, you are the exact target of the modern surveillance economy. Naomi is the host at MBTV, a driving force behind the Ludlow Institute, and she's out there every single day teaching people how to reclaim their digital autonomy. We are living in an era where your phone is tracking you, your car is spying on you, and data brokers are selling your life to the highest bidder. Naomi is on the front lines fighting back. Whether she's teaching you how to lock down your home network, protect your communications, or use cryptocurrency for true financial privacy. She doesn't just warn you about the problem, she gives you the exact blueprint to fix it. Before we dive in, I want to talk about independence. Naomi focuses on owning your digital footprint, and on this show, I focus on owning my distribution. For over 20 years, I dealt with the demonetization and constant algorithmic throttling of my videos. When you build an audience on a massive tech platform, you are building on rented land, and you're always at the mercy of their ideological, weighted algorithms. That is why there's no ad breaks and no corporate sponsors on this podcast. I want a direct line to communicate with you. If you get value out of these episodes, the only thing that I ask is that you contribute constructively to the conversation down below and head over to warriorsgarden.com and join the email list. That is the only guaranteed way I can communicate directly with the people who value what I have to say. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Naomi. Naomi, thank you so much for joining me today. So let's start off here. Just a quick, brief bio about you, the Institute, and everything that you have.
Right. So I run an institute called the Ludlow Institute. We're focused on advancing freedom through technology, and we mainly focus on decentralized tech, privacy tech, anything that we feel can give people back freedom using technology. And I started that because I was really interested in this, rewind 13 years. And I was really interested in decentralized technology as a tool for freedom. And we were starting to see a big boom in 3D printers. You know, there's cryptocurrency.
13 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. About around that time. And I realized all of this decentralized tech was really turning the tables of power. You know, you see a lot of authoritarian regimes around the world, and populations can lose, freedom pretty easily. And once it's lost, it's very hard to get back. And so I was seeing all this decentralized tech as actually, can we empower individuals so that they can just, protect their own rights and things. But then I kind of had this tipping point where I realized that it doesn't matter if you have a decentralized protocol when you're looking at things like cryptocurrencies. If governments want to target, if they don't want you using it, if you don't know how to use the internet privately, then they'll just target you. And that was kind of an awakening moment, because I was like, oh, wow, if I needed to use the internet privately, would I know how to do it? And I read Snowden's book in 2019, which kind of solidified that shift from just pure decentralized tech to privacy. And I was learning about all these programs that I'm like, holy moly, I don't know what any of this stuff is. There's such an asymmetry between how integrated tech is into my life and how much I actually understand about it. So I remember the first privacy video that I did, where Snowden tweeted something about he doesn't use Wi-Fi because there are, publicly accessible access points, that anyone can look at and you can map people. And I was like, what's an access point? And so I go into this rabbit hole and I'm like, okay, well, what is my router actually doing? And what's the difference between a router and a modem? And then what's going on in that cable and, what the access point, how does that integrate? I did this deep dive. I found this website called Wiggle, where you can basically look up anyone's SSID or anyone's BSSID, and you can find a list of other places that they've connected to. And you see MAC addresses, and you suddenly can start to map someone's entire life. You can see, okay, Naomi's been at the Bitcoin conference. And
How is it indexing? Is it just off of an identifier, or is it by a profile?
It's everything. So Wiggle is the tip of the iceberg. Wiggle is a community-run project that's really cool, that basically their entire purpose is to show people how insecure Wi-Fi is and how much data you're leaking. Because, when you're driving around, you're war driving for Google and Apple, every signal in your phone that pops up, it is basically triangulating your location. Because
break down war driving for the average person who may not have that technical.
For sure, yeah. So war driving is kind of this fun, community thing that goes on. And the Wiggle community has this war driving competition every year. And they're just a great group of people. Basically, you drive around picking up signals as you go. And as you move, signals will change. They will either get increase or they will decrease. And by that movement, you can start to map someone's location. That's kind of the end result. But the war driving is just that collection of those signals so that you can basically create a geographical map of every SSID and BSSID in existence. Now, if you think about what the war driving community is doing versus what Apple and Google are doing by literally billions of devices around the planet constantly war driving, because they're constantly picking up how far away are you from each Wi-Fi signal and collecting that information and using it to triangulate your location. So that was an awakening moment for me. I put together this video. It got over 1 million views, and I was I was thinking I was an idiot. I was like, surely everyone knows about this, and if this were a big deal, someone would be talking about it. And it turns out no one knows about this or even looks into it, and no one talks about it. And that was my awakening when I realized that there was this whole area of surveillance that no one's talking about or exploring, and people desperately wanted to learn more. That's
pretty wild, because I'm trying to think 13 years ago. So where I was kind of at maybe in my technical career then, I started C++, doing Java and HTML, MySpace definitely got most of us that were at that point in our life.
We're all coders now.
Right. I feel like Tom Anderson inspired more of a generation of hackers than just about anybody else.
Hey.
But I guess at that point, it was probably the transition from Diablo miners with Bitcoin mining to getting right into GPUs around that point in time. So I'll be brutally honest. Like you were talking about earlier before we started recording, I was thinking very much about that, libertarian subreddit where we're talking about decentralized monies and all these other different things. But privacy wasn't necessarily as much of a core focus for me at that point in time. And like you say, I've kind of seen this digital litter, this wake of data points that people are just frivolously just throwing out into the world for other, third parties to collect and index at their own will. And so it's a can of worms to unpack. So what I'd like to do is play devil's advocate as just the average person who may not have any technical proficiency. And the thing I want to absolutely destroy is the argument that most people have that are just, I don't understand why I need to care about privacy. I have nothing to hide. And so if we could go through some of the different sectors that you might think people are the most vulnerable, it could be anything from ACR on TVs to LexisNexis and vehicles, to flock cameras, government censorship of, finances, whatever these things are. Where do you think the Trojan horses are that the average person may not be worried about now, but in the next 3 to 5 years, it will come on their radar in a way that's maybe irreversible?
Yeah, I think people use that I have nothing to hide argument because they're maybe in a bubble and they're in a particular position in their life where they happen to align with mainstream thought. That doesn't always happen. And not only that, you don't always align with government thought. Sometimes there are bad laws passed and you need to be able to push back. You can't do that safely unless you can communicate privately with people, organize privately, form protest movements. That's kind of this bastion, this fundamental protection in society. We have these self-correcting mechanisms that rely on privacy, investigative journalism, whistleblowers, dissidents. All of these people need privacy, and that's kind of this counterbalance when you have centralized power. But to give you some examples, the Vestamo hack is a great example. This was a giant hack that happened in Europe a while ago, and it was someone who broke into this mental health clinic, took all of their files, I think it was Finland, and released it on the dark web. People committed suicide from that. You have children who are seeing therapists and telling them their most intimate thoughts, and this stuff ends up in public consumption. If we were to actually honestly self-evaluate and think does every thought that I have, is that something that society would be okay with? Am I okay with society knowing that? Obviously, there are things that we want to keep sacred and to ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. It means that sometimes we need to protect ourselves. Sometimes society isn't always accepting of, even thoughts that everyone has, society may not be accepting. There's a lot of taboos in society. And for a long time, marijuana is this total taboo, drug use. And obviously over the last 10 years, that's completely shifted. The norms have changed. Now, we're looking at decriminalizing it at the national level. But for a long time, a lot of things that we do in society, they're not necessarily normalized, right away. And so you can actually be in danger for having certain views, doing certain things. And if you think about online activity and all of the data points that are harvested from everything you do, yes, they can absolutely, tell things that the feelings that you're having, the thoughts that you're having, because you're giving them search queries. You're using AI to be your therapist and your doctor and your lawyer. You're hovering slightly slower on certain things in your feed, and the algorithm is picking that up and saying, oh, Naomi liked that post, even though she didn't click on it. She's probably too scared to click on it, but I saw her looking at it. In 2019, it was found out that Facebook was turning on the front camera of people on their phone as they're scrolling their feed. And then when that was discovered, they said, that was a bug. And it was sure, Facebook.
I was always made fun of for being the guy that had tape on everything. And this was probably 2010, 2012. And they're like, oh, you're just such a paranoid tinfoil hack. And now it's it's interesting because I before I started writing my next book, I wanted to go through some of the classics to kind of set the tone. So clearly went down the path of George Orwell and Animal Farm in 1984. And what's interesting is, it was actually a really emotional experience rereading Animal Farm because I hadn't since I was really young. And just seeing how people are willing to accept certain things in a period of time and kind of the parallels. There's a lot of things to take away from that, but outside the obvious ones, just the acceptance at a societal level, things that 10 years ago you would feel like there would be some type of I don't want to say revolution, but there would be a clear friction point, borderline uprising of the people to prevent something like that from happening. And my concern in a lot of ways is, as all these data points, and very much like the work you were working on with the legislation with Massey and Boebert, was that by circumventing the Fourth Amendment, all of these data points used with artificial intelligence systems, which at a fundamental level, if you were just to take away the conversations around agentic systems and ASI or AGI and everything else, just at a core function of machine learning, having the ability to index and parse such large information at scale, and then in the past, you used to have a team query things, and you would have to have a number of people get together and focus on one person and to be able to autonomously look at these data points and say, okay, this person is a threat to our party or to our cause or whatever these things are. I feel like the rails for that authoritarianism is being developed in a way that's unprecedented. And my concern is very much like what you were talking about before, is not just the thought that people are going to have that somebody might know what they're thinking, but the actual, I forget what the term is called, but it's like the observation effect in which people change the way they think because they know they're being observed.
Yeah.
And so it conditions a behavioral abnormality in the way people live based off of being observed. And so it's such an overwhelming task for the average person because the Internet of Things is ingrained so much in your life that between Charter or Comcast or Xfinity with the Wi-Fi sensing and stuff like that, where it's the RF signals are monitoring where you are in your house and all these other different things. How do you even approach it as a non-technical person right now? What is the very first thing that you say, okay, look, I know it's a lot. Outside of reaching out to your representatives about just putting your flag in the sand saying this is a single vote issue for me, or a hard line in the sand, what are the things that they can proactively do? Do you start with a phone? Do you start with your car? What is the thing that you say, let's start here, let's peel the onion back and have some type of proactive measures that people could?
Well, I think that people don't realize how much of this stuff is in their own control. And let's talk about kind of the policy side of that before we get to the practical side, because it helps paint a picture. A lot of people don't realize that the government can get your email and your phone calls and your text messages and your photos that you stored on Google Drive and your files that you stored.
Is any one company any better than the other? If you have a third-party service like Gmail, are they
No, because of the third-party doctrine. So fundamentally, it is baked into how we protect Fourth Amendment rights in the United States that if you interface with a third party, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy. It's an atrocious precedent that the courts set up, but it essentially means that in an internet era where everything you do requires a third party, you're querying DNS, you're using infrastructure, like all of the internet infrastructure and all of the cloud providers and all of these servers that you're pinging APIs, everything is able to be collected without a warrant by the government. It is fair game under the third-party doctrine. So first start understanding that. And then you have to realize, okay, given that when I use the internet, everything is able to be collected without a warrant because this is an atrocious precedent, how can I protect myself? Well, you need to look into privacy technology. So things like end-to-end encryption, zero-knowledge proofs. So you have to compare the companies like Gmail, for example, where they get access to everything, which means that the government gets access to everything if they want to give a blanket subpoena, and Google, will hand that over, versus something like Proton, where they're, encrypting everything with zero-access encryption or end-to-end encryption in network, where they're not even getting access to that data. So if the government wanted to come and say, here's your subpoena or your NSL and gag order or whatever they're doing, hand over your data, they actually have nothing to give. And Signal is a great example. Compare SMS or Instagram DMs with Signal, an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. Signal has been subpoenaed so many times where the government's like, give us your data. And they always have these amazing blog posts where they will print their response and say, okay, here's everything we have and it's nothing. Which is great. So if you can find the companies that are using technology to even take that information out of their own hands, that's going to protect you. Companies like Apple, they're doing some interesting R&D, and obviously they collect way too much data about people, but they are also trailblazing when it comes to things like homomorphic encryption. So things where you can actually do compute on files without ever getting access to those files, the raw files themselves. So they're doing things like tagging and location tagging and facial recognition, all that kind of stuff, but using homomorphic encryption so they actually don't get that underlying data. They're kind of protecting you by not putting it into their own hands. So that's where I would say to start looking at these everyday things like email, messaging, browsing, what kind of search engine are you using? And just compare the ones where data is actually being collected by these companies versus they're not actually collecting any data at all.
Okay, let's go down that rabbit hole then. Say I have a Gmail account right now, and I'm not saying to endorse any one company in any capacity, but like if that's the Google don't be evil is the shining example of what not to do for the most part. How do you approach and what do you approach? I mean, clearly, like Proton has encryption, but is it something worth like exploring self-hosting or like, I'm just trying to figure out, okay, if that's the case, is there an issue potentially with Apple, on the device, because again, I'm going to go down so many different paths in so many different ways in the future. But as an example, there were concerns of, Siri being a ChatGPT wrapper, what third parties would have OS level access to applications so that in the event there is end-to-end encryption, they still have access to those keys to access those.
Absolutely. So there was a great talk at DEF CON last year. Magid gave a talk where I think it's Yoav Magid, and he looked at Siri, and it's kind of, tech is hard. I'll just say that, right? Because take Apple, for example. You have like decades of code that's built up. And when you have something like Siri, this is an archaic infrastructure that is not end-to-end encrypted. It is not secure. And now they've added Apple Intelligence, which is using, secure enclave and things like that to protect you and do compute inside things that Apple can't get access to. But what happens when these two things interface, right? It's so complicated. Sometimes even the technicians themselves don't understand what code they've created. What he discovered is that when you use Siri with these new like Apple Intelligence tools, so for example, like we know that iMessage is end-to-end encrypted. Not when you use Siri. It turns out if you use voice dictation, that is actually sent in the clear to Google, like to Apple servers. And people didn't know. Even Apple didn't know. They first of all pushed back and they were like, oh, well, you can only see that. Like, I think he looked at WhatsApp and it's like, oh, well, WhatsApp didn't implement it correctly. Here's our SDK. This is our like messaging kit that you're meant to use. And so he's like, okay, I will build a messaging app from scratch using your exact requirements. And it still didn't work. And then he's like, okay, now I'll test iMessage, which is your messaging app. You probably should have used your own, requirements. And it still didn't work. And so it turns out Apple themselves didn't know, or maybe they did know if we're being conspiratorial. But either way, this was a giant vulnerability because you have this old technology, this new technology, the way they interface creates all of these holes. And that's kind of our life. So it's important to not get overwhelmed by that, right? Start with the lowest hanging fruit that you can control. So I would start with the easiest thing is your browser. If you're using Google Chrome, stop. If you're using Edge, stop.
What about a Chromium?
Chromium is fine depending on, the service.
Like
so Vanadium is also a security focused one that comes with the Graphene phone, but Brave is fantastic. Brave really, it starts from that Chromium base, but it strips out all of the Google and it just fortifies your privacy in so many ways. They stop bounce tracking. They sandbox, I banged the mic. They sandbox as you're going through sites so that, websites can't follow you across sites. For bounce tracking, they try to predict, like instead of bouncing you through a bunch of websites and then taking you to your final location, tries to predict, okay, we've learned that this website always sends you here. We're going to bypass all the tracking mechanisms in the middle and just send you straight there. So they do awesome things with that, with browser fingerprinting. I would start with your browser. It's so easy. Like you're actually going to get a better experience going on Brave because you will save on bandwidth and the pages will take less time to load because you're not loading a million ads. And because they block ads, you can watch YouTube without ads now, which is great,
What about when you're using those browsers, saving passwords and those,
So yeah, there's some debate. I would say if you are currently reusing passwords, absolutely create new ones and saving in the browser is better. But even better, you should use a password manager, but you should use a really good one, reputable one. You should know how they're storing your passwords. LastPass had an atrocious hack where they were doing terrible storage techniques. So there are much better tools that you can use out there. You should be randomly generating a minimum of 16 digit strings or character strings for every password and never reusing anything.
Never reuse. And explain that a little bit, because I don't think the average person that, maybe people who are a little bit older have gotten a handful of those free Experian, trials and stuff like that because of a data breach here and there. But I don't think the average person really understands the amount of data that is leaked in some capacity or sold in some capacity, where their username and their password is associated with that. And that is a domino that just falls for so many people in phishing schemes.
Yeah. So I think it's the former president of Cisco once said there are two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that don't yet know that they've been hacked. So, everything's hacked. Presume that the company cannot keep you safe because it is so difficult to plug every hole in your system, and all an attacker needs to do is find one of them. So what happens in a data breach is when passwords or usernames or email addresses or your name, all of these things are leaked. These go into databases that get shared around the dark web and people buy them and sell them. They're also scraped by data brokers. They're also scraped by all kinds of contractors that work for the government. Yep. And so all of this data ends up being rife material for correlating your activity across the web. But what hackers will do is they will look at that and they'll say, oh, here are passwords. Maybe they're stored in clear text. Some companies do that. Maybe they're salted, but with some mechanism that people are familiar with, so they're able to unencrypt them. But basically, once you get someone's password, the first thing hackers do is go through every other account they can think of and try that same password. And they automate these systems, so they're not just trying the password; they're trying that password with an exclamation point at the end now, with a number at the end now, with this year at the end. So if you're someone who uses the same password but changes like the last digit, like it's not going to save you, right? And they have things called rainbow tables where they're basically pre-hash these passwords. So you've got like this hashed password, which basically is like a scrambled up version of the password that websites usually save. But then they will translate that to what it is in clear text, so that they could say, oh, this is what we got from the data breach. This is in my rainbow table. I'm mapping it to this real one. I'm going to try that, in the website. Oh, it worked. So they're basically books that you can buy with unhashed passwords and things. So all of this stuff, to be clear, the takeaway of this is you should randomly generate passwords. If you are using real words, and it's just like a single word, or it's your dog's name or whatever it is, that is so quickly brute forced with today's technology. It's a matter of seconds that password can be guessed. It's not safe at all. Like, you need random characters. It needs to be randomly generated. And that's why password managers are great. They will randomly generate it for you and store it. And you can fortify protection of that entire vault by adding things like a security key, which is a physical thing that actually there's no known phishing ability for that. Exactly, like a YubiKey. If you protect that, someone would need to have physical access to your key to access it, which is worlds apart from, every hacker in Eastern Europe and, China and America and anywhere else you want to be, being able to access your files, with your password online.
What about native password manager password generators like Apple's and stuff like StrongPass? And
it's funny because I talk to a lot of cryptographers, and also I talk to a lot of like open source hardware people who are very skeptical about how random the random number generator on a person's actual hardware is, and so that's why they're currently looking to like RISC-V instead, or some sort of alternative architecture. I would say that's is much better than reusing Fido as your password. So I'll leave it at that. But we have a long way to go when it comes to being able to trust hardware as well. Okay. There's a reason why when you work for the government, they don't let you have a normal laptop. They have a laptop that doesn't have Intel's remote management engine in it. Why? Because it's a remote management engine and they need to fortify. So the things we're using every day, we need to understand that these are really not secure tools, and the people who want to protect themselves and know what they're doing, they're using other tools. So let's look at what they're using.
Okay, browsers, password managers. What about the device level, like you're talking about there, as far as phones? You can go down the rabbit hole of all these other different companies coming out now that are supposed to be privacy focused. But, you get a lot of people that'll have conversations and they don't want to openly endorse a product. And I totally understand that. But from a sheer security and privacy perspective, the average person's like, is an iPhone okay? Is older, iOS 17 okay versus the new stuff that has the AI component to it? What about Android? Okay, I know you mentioned graphene. The average person probably hasn't even heard of graphene. Why is that better? What are the alternatives to what people currently have, or is that okay that they have an iPhone?
Yeah, I will happily endorse GrapheneOS. It's a free open source software operating system, and it is the gold standard for privacy.
Why?
Because they fortify everything. First of all, the hardware prerequisites that they require for graphene, they require currently for you to use a Pixel. They're currently looking into other devices because we could go down another rabbit hole, but AOSP is going out the window. Google's probably going to be stopping it. But currently, you have things like the Titan M2 chip in a Pixel phone, which is amazing for brute force protection. So at the hardware level, if someone takes your physical device, it's very difficult, near impossible for someone to break into that. I have a graphene phone. Some of the protections that I enjoy is I silo apps across different profiles. A lot of people don't realize that apps can talk to each other without you realizing on your phone, and apps can also see which other apps are on your phone. So your banking app knows you have that crypto app. How does that affect your risk profile? How does that affect whether or not they're going to debank you? And so if you silo them across profiles, you can stop apps talking to each other. They're also, every profile has its own encryption keys. So I can walk around with my phone, after first unlock, your PIN basically is accessible to that phone somewhat. I mean, it's not easy to extract it, but it is possible to if, you're a higher target. But before first unlock, that's not in RAM or anything. And so that's inaccessible. Basically, with other profiles, when you exit out of a secondary profile, it's like shutting down your phone. So that is wiped from RAM. It's wiped from, being accessible. So if someone steals my device, the only thing that they might possibly be able to get is something in my main profile that has already been logged in. All the other profiles are locked up as tight as they can be. So, other than that, Graphene has granular controls over everything. I can literally choose exactly which permissions. No, I don't want this calculator app to have sensor permissions. Why would they need it? I don't want it to have network connections. No, I don't want it to see other devices on my network. I can granularly control all of that. So yeah, Graphene is wonderful. I love it.
Do they have variability and unlock? I guess I don't know, functions. So you could, I forget what OS has this, but you can have a duress pin.
Duress pin.
Yeah.
Yep. They also have, I use a password on my phone instead of a pin. A pin is actually sufficient with a Titan M2 chip. But I also don't want someone being able to see,
Right.
6 digits as
Do they have a randomizer function?
They do have a randomizer if you want to use it. I find that so annoying though. It's because I just want to quickly unlock my phone. So instead I just use a password because it's long enough that someone looking probably wouldn't be able to catch what I'm writing. But I also have a privacy screen to try to stop that as well. So,
yeah. I would say with a randomizer, it is frustrating. But the cool thing about that I've from my first book that I've noticed is any of these digital systems where you introduce a friction point, there's a cognitive stimulus there. Because, and the inverse of that is also true. When you remove friction, there's a cognitive atrophy.
Yeah.
And so that you just mindlessly doing that, because there's no variability in that, makes it that much more easy to become I guess, addicted to it, or that skill atrophy.
That's such a good point. All right, you may have just converted me. I do try to put barriers in front of behaviors that are not serving me, and I definitely check my phone more often than I need to. Like, why on earth do I need to check it every 5 minutes? I'm literally unlocking. I don't have notifications on my phone, so at least it's not interrupting my thought. I check it when I want to. It just so happens that I want to check it every 5 minutes, but maybe that barrier would be enough. Like, I have different devices. Like, I have a Mac and I have a Linux computer, and I put certain apps only on my Linux computer. Like, if I want to check social media, there's only one computer where I am logged in there. And so it's enough that I have to change devices away from the device where I do all my editing.
Are you using social media on the Linux?
Yeah.
And so is it like a virtual computer that you're using that on? You're like
no. Just I have a System 76.
Okay.
So it's a completely separate
just
device.
Like, screw it, I'm going to burn it every single time.
I literally have a separate device because I shut that. The System 76. This computer is actually a little annoying. I like the company, but this one doesn't go into sustain mode properly. Yeah. So the fans go all the time. So I actually have to turn it off every time I finish using it, which means that if I want to check social media now, I have to reboot my computer.
Oh, wow.
That is a big friction point, which means that I am far less likely to mindlessly scroll Twitter.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the graphene thing now because, again, I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of the casual person.
Oh, they should not dive into something. They should start with email. Like on email, there is one button that you can click in Gmail that imports your entire Google history, including like your contacts, your calendar history, all of that into Proton.
Oh, really?
You should click that button. If you're looking for low-hanging fruit, it should not be, I'm going to flash a new OS on my Pixel device.
That was my next question was, can you buy graphene phones from anyone out there? It's like,
you can, but honestly, I think it's interesting. I have a few takes on this. If you're going so far as to put a different operating system on your phone, you're adding a big trust mechanism if you're going to buy it from someone. Is this a honeypot that you're buying it from? You don't know. It's a very secure phone. What kind of people are buying it? Everyone demonizes privacy these days. And so it could be something that was set up to try to, target people who are doing bad things. So I think that individuals who care about privacy should just learn how to flash it. And honestly, graphene makes it really easy.
I was going to say, and to be fair, when you hear graphene, it seems a little intimidating. It sounds cool, but explain like the operating system and how it's very familiar to a lot of people. Maybe not iOS users, but Android.
Yeah. So first of all, the flashing process is so easy. You go to their website, you plug it in, and you just follow the buttons on the screen. You click that one and it does it. You click that one and you're done. It's honestly, they do such a good job taking away that friction. But the actual operating system is just like Android without all the spyware, which is great. Yeah. Everything you're doing is not being communicated back to Google. And so it'll be very familiar to Android users. I was an iPhone user like my whole life. And when I first started using graphene, it took a while to switch over. And I carried 2 devices with me for about a couple of years, where there were certain things where I'm like, okay, well, I only have that app on iPhone. And so I liked having the iPhone there. And it got to a point where I just was not using it. It was kind of like this dead weight. And I was using graphene for everything because it just started to grow on me. This idea that what I'm doing stays on my device. It's not being sent to some graphene company that is, collecting this data. And it just felt so distasteful using a device like Apple, where, for example, they're bypassing my VPN kill switch anytime they want, and they call it core functionality. No, they're doing this for using the App Store and using the Health app. Like, why are they bypassing my VPN? If I choose to have a security protocol on my device, a privacy protocol, and they're opting to just route around that, and they're not telling me, and they're putting up billboards that say privacy, your phone, everything stays on phone. I just find that really distasteful, and it made me just not want to engage with them anymore.
Again, trying to be the average viewer in so many different ways that may hear these things because, geez, there's so many creators who are sponsored by VPNs, and it was a great segue because that was the next thing I was going to talk about, is what is a VPN? Why is it important? Why should I be using one? And what are the differences between those out there?
Right. And this is like, this topic is a landmine.
It is.
Because I would say that VPNs are an atrocious industry filled with scamware, and most of the VPNs you will find are collecting information about you and are just shell companies for data collection tools. By definition,
that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're funneling.
They're funneling every single thing you do through their server, right? What are they doing with that? Well, some companies are protecting your privacy. Some companies are harvesting that so that they can create, botnets. And so like it's really difficult to navigate this world. I would say that it is simultaneously a terrible scam-filled industry and absolutely necessary protection. Why? Because when you go to websites, they see your IP address. Your IP address it can be precisely mapped to your location, right? Yeah. There are services where you can pay $5 and put in someone's IP address. I mean, there are free services where you can go and see their general location, but you can get a granular address from someone's IP address if you pay the right, provider on the dark web. So you do not want to be giving away, like if you go to a jewelry site and they get your IP address, but maybe, someone has intercepted that traffic. And so now some thief is trying to figure out who buys expensive jewelry, or maybe there's a crypto site. They're like notoriously intercepted, and phishing sites try to get it in front of real sites. So there are so many reasons why you don't want every company, every website you interface with to get your IP address.
But it slows my internet connection.
It doesn't. It's great. These days, there are amazing VPN providers out there. And what it does is it routes all of your traffic through their server so that when you actually get to that website, all they see is the VPN's IP address. And it also provides encryption. So if you are on your computer, how VPN works, it will encrypt your traffic before it sends it out. And so that also means that if you're on like a public network, like at a cafe or something, that traffic generally would have, encryption in transit anyway, but it's still a good practice. There could be some sort of a man-in-the-middle attack there that you don't know about, where someone might have the ability to intercept. And so encrypting that traffic on your device first is a good security mechanism.
How can a person know if their VPN provider is a scam, or are there any?
I'm so sorry, no answer. But I will say that there are some reputable ones out there. I could tell you what I personally use, and then other people will have other opinions. But I really like Mullvad. I also use Proton because I use the Proton suite for a lot of things. But
Mullvad's cool because they actually allow you to mail in a check or cash.
They accept crypto. They accept cash. I really like that. I would say if you're looking for VPNs, there are a lot of providers out there that will pay you 50% affiliate fees to whichever influencer supports them. Be very careful of that. Why do they have such a wide margin that they are able to pay that? How are they making that money, right? Because the price of the VPN is in line with some of these others. Well, they're probably selling your data.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of these companies, these VPN companies, they own like a ton of different VPNs, and they own the magazines that supposedly vet them. And so when you see these articles that say the top 5 VPNs, that magazine's owned by the VPN company.
It's wild.
So be careful out there. All of these kind of affiliates, that should be a kind of a red flag. It doesn't mean that affiliates are always bad, but in the VPN industry, the margins are so wide that it should make you ask questions about where that profit is coming from.
Okay. So we've kind of at an individual level looked at the user on their device, their devices, VPNs, how they're accessing the internet. Getting into the world of Internet of Things is such a overwhelming task because it's everything. The programmed obsolescence has led to a subscription service for everything, which means that there is some type of authentication process that requires a Wi-Fi connection so that they can enforce that subscription so that they can nerf features or whatever. Bosch has a dishwasher that connects to the internet, stoves, refrigerators.
Why do you need your dishwasher to connect to the internet?
Appliances that connect to the internet. And I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of the issues of, Roomba. And then, it was 40 million users of Roombas. And when Amazon went to acquire Roomba, I guess U.S. population, rightfully so, made a big deal about that, because having sensors that are mapping the house and everything, working in conjunction with Siri and all these other situational awareness tools of somebody's place of sanctuary is scary enough. But then they filed for bankruptcy and were sold to a Chinese company, which now has the maps of 40 million homes, right? Yeah. And so the scary thing is like there's so many devices requiring some type of authentication and Wi-Fi connection in your house. What's the first thing that you do?
Silo your network. How
do you do that?
So I create a bunch of different subnets, and I silo things according to how important it is. So IoT devices are on a network where it cannot talk to any devices on any other network. Those devices can talk to IoT if I need to, but it's one-way traffic.
So you're creating a VLAN.
I'm not using VLAN. I'm literally doing like subnetting, and I have Ethernet cables like hanging from like my house.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
I did it myself too. I should have gotten someone to like do it professionally, but instead I'm like up in the attic, like trying to untangle cords and things. But I keep everything siloed. Like IoT devices are notoriously insecure. Absolutely. Security is the last thing on their mind of these companies. And if you have something insecure on your network, that is a vantage point where an attacker might enter through that system. And once they're on your network, they might move laterally to another device on that network, which means that they enter through your IoT device and then they get into your computer and they steal your bank information and their passwords and all of that. So it's really important to not allow these insecure devices to talk to important devices on the network. So you could do that. Even creating a guest network helps. So if you have the ability, a lot of people, it's the easy way to do it. Just like, here's the guest network, different password and whatever. Okay, put your IoT devices on that and just have that as your separate network. Or you can use VLANs. Like you can use all kinds of things. You can even have like a Starlink, a separate internet provider set up where you actually have multiple networks. I have that too.
It is expensive, but my chickens do have their own separate.
Yeah, there's a very pampered chickens. How's your uplink speed today, chickens?
It's great. I think it's close to 200 to 500 down on average, and like 1 to 200. Your
chickens must be very happy.
It's absurd. So like I created I'm open sourcing like a lot of these tools that I build just because I like disrupting certain areas in the world of misaligned incentives, I guess you could say, and greenwashing in so many different ways is one of the things that just infuriates me. And so one of the things I was building, my chicken coop has cameras in the nest boxes outside where they eat, where they sleep, all these different places. And so whenever I give someone a carton of eggs, they scan a QR code and it gives them an automated feed of the eggs from that day.
So cool.
So you get transparency.
I want to buy eggs from you. That just makes me feel so much happier.
The idea is that hopefully small farmers, because transparency in supply chain is really it's a really cool value proposition, because at scale it doesn't work, because big factory farms and stuff like that are never going to give you that transparency because people can't stomach that. But small farms who have the ethical treatment, the regenerative agriculture, or whatever these things are, grass finished animals or whatever, they can provide that transparency. And hopefully if they live in a pro cottage food law state, they can sell those direct to consumer and sell them at a premium. So it helps incentivize small farmers to create elasticity in the food supply, because I feel like there's so many concerns for me in society, and that elasticity in supply chain is kind of concerning, in that like if one of the big four meat producers shuts down, or processors, there's all the small farms going out of business and everything. So I look at problems problems from like 30,000 foot. And I'm like, okay, how can I kind of disrupt this and help the little guys build something that helps them make a little bit more money, but also it's creating a more emotional connection between the end user and the farm or the brand. So I feel like everybody kind of wins in that situation.
No, that's wonderful. That you're giving an edge to the people who can't outcompete the bigger entities. Yeah. There was a guy that I know who, in the early crypto days, he used to have a food dispensary that you could pay crypto to this QR code, and there's a camera feed, and you could feed his chickens.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, this is amazing. So I'd feed the chickens, but then I was like, and then he started selling it. I'm like, oh, people could feed me chocolate. And so on my channel, I used to do live streams. I had a chocolate dispenser. It was the most distracting thing in the world. I'd be in the middle of being like ranting about Fourth Amendment violations. And this is why and then I'd be like, ooh, chocolate. Like, someone fed me. He's like, thank you. It's ridiculous.
I took it to the next level too. So you can go to chickenparty.com. And so you can pick black soldier fly larva or chicken scratch, and you can buy feed for the chickens. And what it'll do is you can pick a genre of music. And so an AI DJ will come on and it'll be like, shout out to Naomi for sponsoring this party for the ladies. You pick a genre of music, metal, country, or whatever.
So cool.
And then it'll start playing some AI country music or AI death metal or something. So you see the chickens walking around eating the treats.
Having a party. This is great. Thanks, Naomi. Best party I've been to all day.
Yeah. But I digress. So we're talking about siloing the internet connection.
Right. Keep that chicken feed off your main network.
Well, I mean, I did that with a Raspberry Pi and Ubiquiti system and everything.
That's great.
But the IoT devices are notoriously very insecure because the margins are probably razor thin in the hardware components, or they're outsourcing them in some way, shape, or form. So that's the last thing they're thinking about. So for the average listener or viewer, do you just log into your router and you set that up? Just Google a YouTube tutorial on that, or what?
We have a series on privacy for routers if you want to go there. It wouldn't be the first thing I would tackle. I would tackle all the other things we talked about. But what I did, so I use pfSense and I have Protectly device. I like Protectly because they use Core Boot. And so it's something that goes between my modem, and then I've got my Protectly device, and then I've got an access point. I've got a bunch of switches. I've got physical LANs going into rooms in my house.
Wild.
So you would interface with that just by going to whatever your like gateway is. And generally it's like a certain IP address. It's like one of two IP addresses is probably going to be your gateway. No. But you would just go in there, and pfSense has a really great interface. I'm about to redo the series, actually look at OpenSense. I've never dived into it, looking for an expert to help me navigate. I hope it's very similar to pfSense, but basically you can do all kinds of things in there. So it can set up like DNS, like blacklists and things. So for example, you can literally block companies, the IP addresses of companies associated with ads or malware or whatever you want. So I use PF Blocker NG, and I've set up a bunch of block lists. And so it just stops certain things even getting into my network, which is really great. Nice. And then also it allows me to run everything through this Protectly device that is running pfSense, which I trust a lot more than my Xfinity, thing. So I turned that into just an access point, and I turned my modem just into bridge mode, because there's like these tools are notoriously insecure as well. A lot of these consumer grade routers are just like they're just riddled with outdated firmware or CVEs from like 10 years ago that like should have been patched. Like these, like it's kind of crazy how easy it can be. Like one of my friends, Sam, he's like a notorious car hacker. I wouldn't say notorious, I should say like lauded, because he's doing some of the best car prolific research in the industry. But he also found a big vulnerability on his router where he realized that actually it was baked in backdoor for updates. So the company itself that was provisioning this router got hacked and was using this backdoor for remote updates as a way to actually put malware onto people's devices. So things like that happen, and people don't realize because you need someone to actually look, and no one's looking into this stuff. No one's testing it.
What about ISP kind of combo kits? If you get something, say, from AT&T or Xfinity or Comcast.
So they are selling all of your data, and I would try to block as much stuff from them as possible. If you can have something between that device and your network that like is running a VPN, is encrypting that traffic so that they can't actually see, what the DNS is like. I think that a lot of these companies have really toxic culture where they've normalized scraping everything they can about our data, and they're selling this information. So I try to give my ISP as little information about me as possible. But like there are other devices, like there was recently an episode on Darknet Diaries where Ashley, this researcher, she used this thing, basically her dad worked high up in this oil and gas company, and someone at the company was like, oh, you should try one of these super boxes. And they're really popular tools. The Verge did an article about them, about how great they are, where you plug it into your network and it gives you all these free shows, and you can just download shows and all this stuff. It's like $100 or something. And so someone convinced him to get one. He plugs it in. He's like, this is great. I don't need like Netflix and Disney Plus and, all these things. I just have this super box. And Ashley's a security researcher. So she's like, this is some random ass device. Let me analyze it. It turns out this device, when you plug it in, is immediately like sending spiders out to map your entire network, to map all the devices on the network. It is sending all this data to like IP addresses in China. It turns out that these super boxes are like basically used as part of botnets. They're also notoriously insecure, so they're used by botnets that weren't even created by like the manufacturer, but the tool itself is a malicious like mapping tool.
Oh, wow.
That is, so like be real careful with the stuff you bring home and just plug in, because it may be adverse, hardware. Like for example, apparently a lot of people in the oil and gas industry are targeted with this. There were some stories of people like these things just showed up at their doorstep.
Because their device is connecting to infrastructure.
Yeah, because they would just show up and say like, here's a gift or something. The person would be like, great, free TV. I don't know who this is from. Must be an admirer. And so like when we're dealing with critical infrastructure, I think it's really important that you don't just like go plugging things in to your devices.
Wow. Yeah. I see you're wearing a wearable.
I am. Yeah, I'm doing a video comparing all the privacy of these tools. My takeaway is I have bad news. We really don't have a privacy-focused wearables company, and I would love there to be one. But like a lot of this data, again, it should be end-to-end encrypted. I should be able to interface with my app through Bluetooth with this, and the app, it just stays on my device. All the computer's done locally. Doesn't exist.
But you can't enforce that subscription service.
Right, exactly.
If it doesn't route through the cloud.
So we're trying out like Aura, we're trying out Fitbit, we got all this. I've just sent a bunch of devices to a lab in Seattle that is scanning all the devices to find any like hidden radios. Maybe there's GPS in it and we didn't know about it. Like just to get a mapping of what's going on, and maybe then we can dump firmware and start to analyze what's going on. But yeah, all of these things we integrate into our lives. I think we need to understand it better before we're just cavalier about using it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can or I should even elaborate on it. Because there's legal implications. But so like again with the book and the conversations I've been wanting to have with people specifically around things like wearables and all these other different things. I was like, we're going to build this product called Opossum. And it's OPPO, so opposition research.
Okay.
Because a few politicians and everything like that, and some people who work for in different consulting groups and stuff like that. And I was like, what if I built a product using public data and maybe we'll say gray hat exploits using developer SDKs, and create a visualization tool of me that is searchable, and you could even theoretically use things like Mirofish or something like that, where you could have a predictive component to it. So like probabilities and where I would be, when I would be, and all these other different things, which is kind of wild.
Wow.
And when you start looking at very intimate data like heart rate variability and stuff like that, and using Wi-Fi sensing. Your
That
imagination
person is having sex right now.
So, okay, I was going to be polite, but that's how I set up one of the chapters in the book.
Yeah.
So it's like the goal is to make people as uncomfortable. So I'll go ahead and say it. Like, this isn't verbatim, but it's essentially me breaking down a scenario where you're giving a digital footprint that shows essentially the point at which and how you climax within your house.
Oh my God.
And
this isn't a hypothetical. This is absolutely stuff that is going on right now. Did you know that there are car companies that had to remove this from their privacy policy because they accidentally said the private part out loud, where they literally said, we are collecting, they go through all the data that they're collecting. Sexual activity was included as part of the car data that was being collected about you. And when people noticed that, they were like, oh, let's scrub this out. We probably shouldn't have said that. Physical activity. No. Random telemetry and metrics. Oh, okay, that is much better.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue into the vehicle stuff. But so for the average person that may be listening or watching, it's not a hypothetical anymore. And the reason why I think you should just not believe that you have nothing to hide as an argument is because if you felt that way and you allowed us to run this application on you, you would feel so violated if I posted that to the internet. And the fact that a state actor would have access to this stuff, there's no telling what tools are, because I look at things that I built 15, 20 years ago and how I was publicly ahead of the curve on so many different things. I can't imagine how far
ahead they are now.
They are, like, be it foreign or domestic groups. Like, the intelligence world is just amazing. It's and like, I'm just a dumb redneck who likes to play around and figure things out. And it's really kind of, it's concerning to me that the average person doesn't realize that wake of litter that they're just throwing out, casting every day. So let's, I guess, kind of move towards the vehicle and everything, because now you're connecting your phone to the vehicle. The vehicles, modern day vehicles, we can jump into the kill switch legislation, to the OS authentic KYC, age verification, like all the implications for what could be coming in the next 3 to 5 years in a way that the average person might not see.
Gosh, where do we even start with all of this? So that kill switch stuff is abominable. Like, basically, because tech is so integrated into our lives, and tech is ultimately like controllable, and governments really like control, and we're just seeing like this frog in boiling water, them coming in and asserting control. For years, for like decades, we had jawboning, this implicit government pressure exerted onto companies to implement KYC. And so social media companies, for a long time, you would have noticed, now they're requiring a phone number. It has to be a real cell number, not a VoIP number. You have to give your real name. Now you have to do ID verification. They started bringing this stuff in slowly. It wasn't because they wanted more friction between them and their users. It's because behind the scenes, you had government agents saying, okay, these people are problematic, and if you let them stay on the platform, maybe there'll be an antitrust lawsuit, or maybe there will be some other complications, or maybe we won't like you. And so you see companies, long before there were any mandates, just complying with this slow normalization of the things you do on the internet are all identifiable as back to you. So gone are the days of the free internet, where it was first conceived of as this tool where you didn't have to get permission to communicate with someone over the other side of the planet. We could just share information and people couldn't stop it. And that was exciting because it came in an era where, there's a lot of totalitarian regimes controlling people and the flow of information. And this was envisioned as this tool that could break us free from that. And now fast forward, it has become one of the most totalitarian tools for oppression that we have ever seen. It is a very scary tool because we have centralized control. We have normalized access to all of our information. And by the time governments last year came through and did their ID, like this sweep of ID mandates, you would have noticed rolling out through Europe and the UK and Canada and Australia. Everyone just started saying, ID verification. Yeah, because the timing was right. I don't even think it was some coordinated attack. It's not like the governments got together or like, we all agree on this thing. I seriously doubt that happened. Instead, I think that they have behind the scenes been doing this for a very long time. And it's just gotten to the point where they realized people wouldn't push back about it. If they had implemented ID mandates 10 years ago, we would have said, no, get out of here. This is like, what are you talking about? Of course you can't, ID my operating system before I use it. But now they can push this stuff, and it's become so normalized through habitual, interaction with companies, through that like implicit threat, jawboning that's been going on, that now we're all like, oh, okay, well, I mean, I'm numb to it, and it's just normal.
That's what I was getting at with the animal farm analogy, is that words matter. And you see that slow degradation of, be it services or the encroachment of, government control and whatever those things are. And again, it's hard not to sound like, again, the tinfoil hat person, 10 years ago. But then when, the little things make it socially acceptable, they're changing the writing on the barn. And the act of doing that should cause an emotional and vocal response from everybody. And the thing is like the problem is everyone, the sheep keep repeating the same thing over and over and over and over. And then, the words get changed, and then they repeat that over and over, and it becomes normalized. And so for me, I get really visibly angry with people who kind of hide behind that. And they're like, it's like the Save the Children thing or what? What? No, that is not going to save the kids in any way, shape, or form.
We need to ID your operating system to save the children.
Yeah.
We need a kill switch on your car. We need to watch your sexual activity. We need to monitor your innermost thoughts. We need a complete log of everything you've asked ChatGPT. We want your medical history. We want your deepest, innermost desires. We want all of that. And it's to protect the children.
Yeah, I will say this, and this is being as blunt as I can to people who feel like they have nothing to hide in that, is you may not feel that you're being targeted right now, but at some point you will be. There's no question about it. If, it could be by someone maliciously as a hacker or something like that, but at some point you will have a contrarian point of view. Whatever that is. And you look at what was acceptable 70 years ago versus what was acceptable 20 years ago, having that perspective now would, maybe get you canceled or whatever these things are. In the very near future, those things could mean you don't have access to your bank. You don't have access because, that did happen.
Kill switch on your car. You literally have, you can no longer travel anywhere.
Or even an algorithmically based, we'll call it an escalation sequence or something like that, where it's like you had a credit card purchase at this, this bar, but you just got some chicken wings or something like that, and you're driving down the interstate and it's monitoring your speed. You go 2 miles per hour over. There's a cop that has the latest and greatest Maven software and is able to statistically have a probability that gives him probable cause to pull you over based off of that third party data, right? And these things, they sound far-fetched, but they're, if not already here, they're very, very close.
There was a grandmother who got sent to jail for 6 months because AI determined that she did something wrong, but it turns out the AI was incorrect. How did she get into jail? Why was she in jail for 6 months? Why did it take him that long to figure out that the AI was wrong? There was another kid that got arrested at a school. He was arrested because they thought his chip packet, his crisps packet, was a gun. And they arrested him, that kind of stuff. And we're actually moving into an era of preemptive law enforcement.
Yes.
And that is really scary because the whole reason why we have warrants is because we're meant to have two branches of government. Law enforcement should not be able to decide the limits of their own power. That is why the Fourth Amendment was written. That is why you're meant to have the judicial branch come in. They have to make their case. They have to show probable cause. They have to show that they've done their homework, that they have a steadfast, this is solid. We really think that this person did something. Because you don't want them to be able to just intrude on people's lives at their own say-so, right? So you need the judicial branch to say, okay, I agree, and you have enough cause to warrant going into that person, like searching through their things. Because that act of searching through is so invasive and can be abused so easily. When you have unfettered access to someone's life, you can piece together the fragments to form any narrative that you want. And we're now in an age where the judicial branch is nowhere in sight. You have law enforcement buying troves of data that they search at will. They don't call it a search, they call it a database query. And they say that Fourth Amendment rights don't apply, which means that they can piece together whatever narrative they want from the fragments of digital data you're leaving behind. So if they decide that they don't like you, if they get a personal vendetta against you, if you date a cop and it turns badly, all of these things can be used against you.
Which those things have happened.
Absolutely, they've all happened.
And that's the thing I want to like emphasize is that, when it comes to law enforcement, these conversations become politicized so easily. And it's not to say that people don't want law enforcement to be able to do their jobs. If anything, like there should be more funding and education and training and tools accessible to them to help them do their jobs more effectively.
Yeah, we want to catch the bad guys, right?
But there is something to be said for, again, knowledge is power. And privacy is one of those things where people don't, I don't know, I guess when you're a child, you look at teachers, law enforcement, politicians, you hold these people up on a pedestal. You think they're a higher standard intellectually, physically, emotionally. They're just a better version of the human that you want to be or whatever it is. But the reality of the situation is most people are just like you and I. And to give that much power and that much control to someone it's without checks and balances. It's a scary thing, and it really like opens the door to a vulnerable part of the population, whatever that is. Like you could say it was, I don't know, gay people in the 80s and 90s, or even the 2000s.
Yeah.
You could say it's people who believe politically a different way in a specific region, depending on what type of politics, rule your area.
Yeah, and that I will just say, because that point is so important. Like, it's not that we think that the law enforcement are necessarily like corrupt and doing bad things. Even when they have their best interests in heart, the courts talked about this in the 40s, where one of the Supreme Court justices said, he referred to law enforcement as this competitive enterprise of ferreting out crime, right? Law enforcement, they have their own agenda. It's solve the case, find the culprit.
And some of them have misaligned incentives.
Right.
Because they have actual quotas for specific initiatives.
Exactly. And that is why you want the judicial branch involved. And the problem today is under the third-party doctrine, they are just bypassing that judicial oversight. We have no oversight or accountability for any abuse of looking through this data. So we're creating troves of data. Government is saying thank you and collecting all of it, and you don't have a privacy right in that. And the judicial branch are not even looking into what's going on with that data. That's a recipe for disaster. Like, I worked on some legislation that got introduced to the House recently, and it's called the Surveillance Accountability Act. And all it says is basically what the Fourth Amendment says. It just says if you want to do a search on someone, you need a warrant. I think we need to reinvigorate this conversation in society, because people don't realize how much access powerful people have to our lives without any oversight whatsoever. And it's getting to the point where it's getting out of control.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to emphasize in some of these demonstrations, there was the sexual component, which I think will make a lot of people uneasy. But then there's also the people who just maybe don't care, but they've found a little bit of success in life, and so the ability to tie so many of these third-party data points to include financial institutions. So say you maybe do have a little bit of extra money in the bank, and maybe it's not even a domestic. Let's just say every domestic law enforcement agency in the United States operates by the book. But because a lot of these data companies are third parties, or these information systems, third-party corporations that like to sell to other governments and stuff like that. And you take a trip to some hypothetical third world country and your face is scanned as you go through the airport. And that information goes through their law enforcement database, which means that as you're driving your rental car down the road, they're seeing how much money you have in the bank account, how much you withdrew, potentially where your charges were leading up to coming to where you're at now. They could have a higher probability to pull you over or even without probable cause and just extort you. There's I'm trying to have as many worst case scenario edge cases, even if they are edge cases, to say, look, these need to be on your radar because again, it's not coming, it's here in so many different ways. So having said that, we kind of touched on the vehicles. There are security settings within your vehicle that you can disable. What else could you do? I mean, just
cars are hard. Honestly, I think the biggest battle we need to fight right now is being vocal. Companies are not building privacy products because they don't see that people care about this stuff. We're putting up with a lot of things we don't need to put up with. And even the people who care about this, well, it's socially awkward when you go and buy things to push back and ask questions. So we don't do it. And we need to assert our rights.
Well, listen, I would push back in that you get on the internet and you hear people talk about K-trucks. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. KEI. People want those so bad, so bad. They're the little 500cc, 50 horsepower trucks that are very analog and everything, but because they don't meet NHTSA safety regulations and stuff like that, I think there is a cry for analog. Even the newer Ford F-Series pickup trucks, which is the best-selling vehicle in the U.S., doesn't have an auxiliary 3.5 millimeter audio jack anymore. So even if you don't want to connect your phone to CarPlay, Android or Apple, you use the USB stick or something like that, you lose all the functionality of being able to look through artists and music if you download a separate library, right? So you have to connect your phone to it, which is kind of wild. And so it's very, very frustrating and trying to figure that out. What's something that the average person might be able to do when trying to make an informed purchase, and say there are no options? Say you're looking at vehicles, say you're looking at any kind of device, and they all require some form of connectivity. Should you copy pasta and put into ChatGPT and query that to see if, one's better than the other? What do you do when you feel like there's no options?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the AI debate, there's obviously a spectrum of privacy there. You can self-host and query whatever you want, which is great. That data doesn't go anywhere. If you're using ChatGPT, it is all stored forever in a database that is associated with your identity. In the middle ground, you can access really powerful models with companies that have no logging policies. So I like Brave's Leo. So when I'm searching the internet, I use Leo a lot to answer questions. I use Venice.ai. The creator of Signal, Moxie, he just released something called Confer.to. So there are some privacy-focused AI tools that I would lead people to. But when it comes to finding information about these things, I think, figure out which ones have better options. I think in cars, we're at super early stages of this conversation. So you're going to look it up and say, which one is not a surveillance machine? And the AI will, combust and you'll get smoke coming out of your machine because it doesn't exist. It doesn't know how to compute that. So what we need to do is be vocal with all of these things, write to these companies, be okay expressing a desire for privacy and not feel the need to be shamed just because society is asking us, what have we got to hide, as if it's some shameful thing to want privacy. No, we have to reassert our values and tell companies, I do like privacy, and how are you protecting mine, right? So for a car company, for example, you can ask the dealership questions, and if you ask them a question they don't know the answer to, and I can bet they won't, because I've gone to a lot of car dealerships and asked specific questions for videos about privacy policies, they've either given me incorrect answers, oh, nothing's collected, or they don't know. But enough people do that, they have to go find the answers, right? You can even do this in job interviews, right? If it's a job where like it's not going to jeopardize you getting or whatever, but you could ask them a question about their privacy policy at the company you're going to work for, and you can bet that the recruitment person will not know the answer. But in a job interview,
on the equipment or in the environment,
anything in that company, I bet you that they will not have even thought about privacy policies or understand what data is collected. But in a job interview, they then have to escalate that because that was a question that was asked. So they have to go to their manager and ask it. That manager's not going to know. Then they have to escalate it. So for job interviews, it's actually an interesting tool to get things up the chain to say, oh, we had 3 people asking about our privacy policy. So not just that, like mission statement. What does the mission statement of this company say, like about privacy or whatever? They won't know what the mission statement is. So that will have to escalate and someone will have to take some sort of action to answer. So like different vehicles like this, like when I go to a store, I know they don't accept cryptocurrency. And sometimes I know they don't accept cash. And I will still make a point of just asking so that we just provide that necessary information for them that, yes, there are people who want this. You don't have to be a dick about it. You could just be very polite. I tend to be very polite, but it's informational on both sides. I then know which businesses support the values that I have, and these businesses know what their consumer base is interested in so that they can better serve them. So it's win-win when you're vocal about your values and you let companies know you care about privacy. We're at early stages with so many industries, and we do not have private options for a lot of the things we use. We're not going to get them if companies don't know that we value privacy. So on that side of things, consumer side, we can absolutely vote with our feet and be vocal and try to shift mindset. And I would try to remind people that these companies are obsessed with you. They are collecting all your metrics. They are like surveilling you. They are watching every keystroke and your mouse movement. So they care what you're doing and they want to know when you log off their site or when you don't engage with their content. So if you actually give them the information, like I care about privacy, they actually do care about their consumer base because they don't want to lose consumers. On this other side of things, politics, exactly the same thing. Politicians, you feel like they're not listening to a single thing and they don't care about you. No, they care about being reelected. So if you are vocal, it does make a difference. If you let them know, yes, I care about privacy, please don't do a clean reauthorization of Pfizer or whatever else they're doing, sign on as a co-sponsor to the Surveillance Accountability Act. That stuff makes a difference, right? Because they're not thinking about this stuff. They have 1 million lobbyists come through their door and they're thinking about all of the people that they need to appease to get donations to their next campaign. If you as a constituent tell them, I'm a single issue voter and this is something that's important to me, they do take that into account.
Yeah, that's kind of the takeaway in the book and where I'm kind of headed in trying to figure out those things around political accountability. And it's been a very long process, and it's funny. I've been spending arguably more time on this than the surveillance component of it, which is hilarious to me. But it's such a minefield because you have the Federal Elections Committee and the FEC, and there's certain things that you can and can't do. And one of the ways I was looking at it, and I've kind of talked about this on other podcasts over the last few years, but it's like there's got to be some way. We're in such a litigious society to hold a politician accountable for the things that they say to get votes, because it is very much say what you need to say to get votes, and then do whatever it is to get money either to yourself or your campaign through lobbying and special interests in whatever capacity. So how do you put teeth in campaign promises? That's the thing I've really been working on. And I feel like I have a few paths that hopefully will be part of a conclusion in what I'm working on. But how did you go about this with Thomas Massey and drafting up the language and everything? Like I mean, clearly you said 13 years to this point. What was the moment in which you said, okay, like this, something has to be done, and here's how I'm going to do it?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work with think tanks who are dealing with like Fourth Amendment issues. So Institute for Justice is one of them. They do a lot of litigation when there is government overreach violating constitutional rights. And so I worked with their Fourth Amendment project director, Rob Frommer, and he kind of came up with this idea of like, stop playing philosopher kings and letting courts decide what's reasonable, and them deciding that third parties, having your data, it's not reasonable, so we can expect privacy. Like it's a terrible precedent. We need to re-envision this and get legislature involved. And so we came up with this idea of search. No, we will define search. Search means the same thing today that it meant when the Constitution was written. It's not a magical word.
Yeah.
Any meaningful investigation, that is what the Fourth Amendment envisioned. If you do a meaningful investigation of a personal thing, you need a warrant to invade and access their information. So that was the first step. But then Massey really has such experience dealing with people who just flagrantly ignore what the law says, and they get a slap on the wrist. Like, for example, we're meant to have FISA courts that give oversight into whether the FBI is meant to get access to this huge surveillance power that the NSA has created. NSA is only meant to be outward looking, only foreign nations, only foreign people. The FBI is not meant to have access to tools that look inwardly at the population with such surveillance power. But FISA allowed them access under certain conditions. When they did an audit to say like, okay, you've done like hundreds of thousands of queries of these NSA databases, which ones were legitimate? They found like 7 were legitimate or something egregious. So we're seeing just flagrant violation of these safeguards that are meant to be in place, protecting citizens of the country, protecting people in America, that are just being overwritten. So Massey said, no, we need accountability. And that's why it became the Surveillance Accountability Act. Let's first of all define what a search is. So we just cut out all of these areas government's carved out that say they have unfettered access to our lives. And the accountability side is if you violate these Fourth Amendment protections, you can be sued. There is a private right of action written into the bill that says that individuals have the right to sue people who abuse this. Like, no more. We can't just keep giving people a free pass. If they break the law, they need to be held accountable.
I want to emphasize a point that you just said, because I don't think that the average person clearly understands that. And that's the NSA is meant to be outward looking for foreign intel. And wherever that is, threats to national security. The FBI is a domestic agency, and there are, again, checks and balances for intelligence to be gathered on an individual, a citizen in the United States. And that's where the Fourth Amendment comes in. That is a constitutional right that you are given as a citizen, and it's being circumvented through a FISA.
It's been circumvented through everything. It's been circumvented through the third-party doctrine. Yeah. The FBI
that's Patriot Act.
It's the Patriot Act. It's the executive orders from the Reagan era. It's the Bank Secrecy Act in 1970. It is like completely circumventing the Fourth Amendment. And now we have internal domestic law enforcement that have unfettered access to our lives without a warrant, without any judicial oversight, without any accountability. That's really scary.
And so this legislation would hold who accountable? Anybody who accesses it, who initiates it, who sells it, or what?
It would hold the people accountable who do a search without a warrant. If you want to do a search on someone, you need a warrant. And if you don't get a warrant, if you bypass that, then you can be sued.
So again, I'm trying to be as granular devil's advocate here as possible. Would it be the FBI agent? Would it be the director? Would it be the company that's providing the information?
It would be the person who did the search. So this doesn't escalate just to your director. You can actually be held accountable as a person who's meant to uphold the law. As an officer, you can be held accountable if you don't get the warrant. So it really takes it down. Like, we have too many situations where we have all of this immunity and things go up the chain, and then the person up the chain has enough power that they can just say, okay, well, I'll take it as a warning and I won't do it next time. We need to hold people accountable for the things that they do. And so that was...
My concern would be there would be a change in, much like the rules of engagement seem to be wanting, or not the rules of engagement, but the decision-making process, we'll say, in engaging in the kill chain, in the human in the loop versus on the loop conversation. And my concern would be at some point there would be a judiciary process that issues a warrant without a human in the loop, so that they check that box.
I would say that is a much better problem to have than the current one, because even that automated process creates a paper trail and you can hold someone accountable. Like, here's the case that was put forward. This was the algorithm that decided whether it was a warrant or whatever. All of that is way better than right now, where you have searches being done with no paper trail, with no accountability, with people not even knowing that they're going on. They're just buying data sets and looking through it at will. That is why we have things like love-ins, the famous like NSA programs where people are spying on their ex-spouses.
Oh, yeah.
Where you have people being like stalked and abused. You have like countless instances of abuse. That system would at least create a paper trail so that you can show, here was the thing. Why did you look up that woman? What, you dated her for 10 years and now you like want to stalk her new lover? Like, we need some sort of accountability and paper trail in this. And so right now, when there is like no engagement with the judiciary, we lose out. Now, we don't want to stop law enforcement being able to do their jobs.
Right.
They can absolutely go, and we have provisions in there to make sure law enforcement can do their jobs. Like, we do not want to hamper that. We want to make sure that they get a warrant to do their jobs, as is written in the Constitution, because the Constitution was important enough. Like, what the context of that is, the reason we had a revolution in America is you had egregious abuse of power in England. You had the king who would go after anyone who dissented, and if you criticized the crown, you would have the king's men at your doorstep rifling through your things. Again, when you have unfettered access to someone's life, you can piece together fragments to form whatever narrative. So they were going to people's houses who were criticizing the crown. They were finding information and saying, see, there's the reason why we can throw them away for the rest of their lives. And when the Constitution was written, the founders saw that was a huge issue. They were called general warrants or writs of assistance. We can no longer have a general warrant. You can't just have a permission slip that says, I give myself permission to do anything. And you need to have probable cause. You need to have the person you're investigating. You need to say what you expect to find. You need to say where you expect to find it. That is written into the Fourth Amendment. No warrant shall issue except on probable cause, like all of these stipulations. We need those specific warrants to get away from this egregious abuse of power. And instead, in 2026, we are back to a situation where we have ripe ground for egregious abuse of power. And that is bad. Like, we need to bring back the Constitution into the digital era, and especially the Fourth Amendment.
How does the average person help in that?
The average person can reach out to their representative and say, be a co-sponsor on this bill. Like, if you believe in warrant requirements, that is all this says. It doesn't say anything other than what the Fourth Amendment already says.
Is there a timeline on it?
There's no timeline, but what happens with bills is they die in committee. So right now, this has been introduced to the House, and it'll then get assigned to a committee. It might be judiciary. It could be any number of, could belong in any number of committees. It's generally up to the committee. It's up to the speaker. All of these people get to determine whether they will even put it up for a vote, and most bills will disappear. Now, there are ways that you can force a vote if there is enough pressure that you can do something called a discharge petition, which says, okay, we're just going to bypass the leader and take it straight to the vote floor. You need 218 votes in order to get it on the floor. So that's why we need to mobilize public awareness about this, get people reaching out so we can get that bipartisan support for this bill. So that
have a website for that can direct people to find their representatives and everything to reach out to?
surveillanceiaccountability.com.
Awesome. Beautiful. Yeah, because that's the thing that I've if I'm going to remove friction in anybody's life,
right.
it's to that action, right?
It's amazing how difficult that stuff is to.
It is. You get on Google or wherever and you're like, who's my representative? And it's like, well,
I don't know. I'll get it.
So that helps a lot. For the average person, again, there's so much that you can do in peeling this onion back. I think that at least filling some of the cracks on the dam that are leaking right now with that is really important. I mean, there's a bunch of things that we could get in at a later time, but I feel like there should be legislation around, if not constitutional amendments around a right to sanctuary, and like what that entails, and being either to opt out of being tracked or monitored or whatever these things are. Because again, my concern is that a person, even in their most intimate private moments in their, their home, are being monitored in some capacity, even if they have all the power off. It's wild.
Yeah. So we talk about that kind of like biometric surveillance, AI surveillance, things like Flock. We talk about that in the bill as well. Like, again, if governments want to search this data, they need a warrant. Right? Yeah. Because I don't think that you should have everyone's movements, everyone's like face scanned everywhere, like their license plate, their tire pressure, sensors track. Like these things should just not be there for unfettered access, so you can see everywhere a person has traveled, who they've interfaced with, what they've done. That's how we build like gun databases, right? Like I know you went to that gun range, and now like because this Flock camera like caught you going there, so now I have a registry of everyone in America who owns a gun. Now I have a registry of everyone in America who is this particular religion. Now I have a registry of everyone in America who is this particular, sexual persuasion, whatever it is. We now have registries effectively of every single thing that a person like identifies as. And if we ever want to target them,
a lot of people would not call it, or they would call it a registry if it was something for firearms. But like that's exactly what indexing is.
Exactly.
It's just a catalog of people of certain opinions, interests, places, and things.
So let's not whitewash it. Let's not like use these terms like, oh, it's just metrics. Oh, it's just like measurement. Like, no, these are registries of everything like that you identify with as a human, all of your interests.
That's the key takeaway then, is to reach out to the representatives on that. Okay.
And I would say like, there are 3 ways you can fight in your life, right? Or anyone could fight. There is legislation, there's litigation, and there's tech. I personally love the tech route. That's what I focus on, because you don't have to kowtow to politicians to beg for your rights. You can literally just choose technology that protects you. You just choose a better email provider. You can take that information away from anyone who might abuse that information against you. So I love the tech side of things, but at the same time, we're seeing persecution of people building this tech. I'm not convinced that we're going to continue to have privacy tech in the future when we're already starting to arrest people who build privacy tools. So now I'm moving into the legislative side as well, and also bringing in that litigation side as part of this effort. I actually think we need to fight on all 3 fronts. Now, the tech side is things that your viewers can do today. The legislative side is something that viewers can like start to mobilize today, but we need to be actively pursuing all of these things. Otherwise, we're going to cede all of our rights, and the next 10 years is going to look very scary.
I completely agree. And I guess continuing with that then, this is one of many fights. How can people keep up with you and the things that you have going on so that they know what the next thing is? Like if it's the California KYC thing, or there's so many different things. There's so many threats in so many different ways. Like the Institute, what's the best way to keep up with this stuff?
Yeah, so ludlowinstitute.org, LUDLOW. If you go there, you can see we have over 700 free videos that give you tutorials on how to implement tech. We have a weekly newsletter where I'm talking about, laws being passed around the globe, things you should be aware of, things on your radar. Also giving tutorials and things, checklists for privacy things you could be doing. So check out ludlowinstitute.org, check out surveillanceaccountability.com, and they're 2 ways where you can access all of our articles, newsletter, videos, all of that.
Beautiful. And you have a YouTube channel as well.
YouTube channel, yeah.
Lots of great visual information there for tutorials and stories and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So you can find all of that through the Ludlow Institute website. You click on videos, it'll take you to our page, or you can go to YouTube, or you can go to any number of alternative sites. We're on Odyssey, for example. You can find our videos.
Beautiful. Naomi Brockwell, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.